Welcome to A Spirited Debate. I'm Lauren Green. Many people assume evangelical Christian equals conservative religious right, but there is also a progressive movement that identifies as evangelical. And here to explain is Doug Pagitt, author of Flipped, The Provocative Truth That Changes Everything We Know About God. Doug also serves as pastor for Solomon's Porch in Minneapolis. Welcome to you, Doug.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Well, so what do progressive evangelicals believe spiritually?
Progressive evangelicals start with that root that all evangelicals do, that the story of Jesus is really good news in the world. But progressive evangelicals don't think that the only way to express that is inside of conservative politics or a conservative way of viewing the world. We think that the good news extends to all kinds of areas, including people and the planet and poverty and peace, and want to be engaged in the world in those ways.
Very interesting, though, because a lot of people do believe that evangelical equals conservative or equals Republican. And according to the Pew Research Center, of the politically affiliated white evangelical Protestants, 46% are Republican, but 34% are Democrats and 14% are independents. That's really, that doesn't, most people would assume that most of them were Republicans. So what do they believe, what do they want politically, evangelical progressives?
Yeah, evangelical progressives. Yeah, it's interesting, Lauren, that Pew Research taps into something that a lot of us have sensed for a long time, and that is that there's this unknown, kind of invisible group of non-denominationally affiliated or evangelically minded Christians in the world who don't associate with the agenda of only political conservatism. So people who want to see the planet, people who want to see peace in the world, people who want to see others cared for, people who want to see poverty alleviated. So often people who find themselves in those categories have a difficult time associating with the way that conservatives have organized their religion and their politics. And so they're people who want to operate in the world as a benefit and blessing and goodness in the world, and they want to be change makers that see the world in positive ways and want to bring about more of the goodness that they find in other places. And very often they're just not organized, and that's some of the work that I'm doing and some work that I'm doing with a number of other people, is to make visible what is often ignored in not only the press, but other people just don't know anyone who is an evangelical and also has a progressive view of politics or the world or their hope for the future.
A lot of the conservatives are on how you define them is how they view kind of the social causes like, abortion or gay marriage. And how are evangelicals, progressives on that? I mean, what do they believe politically about that? Are they mostly for gay marriage or what are they for?
Yeah, most who would identify themselves as progressive evangelicals would want to be inclusive in their faith and inclusive in their churches and inclusive in their communities, and wouldn't organize around saying that somebody who's in a same-sex marriage should be excluded from their community or from their faith. They would be supportive of some of those more typical kind of progressive ideas, but not all of them. Everyone's different. It's one of the aspirations of evangelicals, right? Is that no one tells you how you're supposed to think about something. That you're kind of called by your conscience and you're called by the life and the way and the teachings of Jesus in the world. So it's not as single block thinkers, and that's been one of the reasons that a lot of people have felt that they can't identify inside of evangelicalism anymore, is because it also comes with this notion that you have to hold to certain political views. And a lot of evangelicals like me, where I was welcomed into the Christian faith by evangelicals, and then I wanted to keep going and keep growing in my faith. And in some segments of evangelicalism, that's looked down upon. So when people find themselves being flipped, as I like to say it in my book, when they find themselves opening to new ideas and the Spirit of God calling them into new ways of thinking and being in the world, they find themselves without a home any longer inside of evangelicalism. So that's part of the reason we're trying to make people aware of the fact that you can be evangelical without having to hold to particular views that other people dictate for you.
You mentioned your book. It's called Flip, the Provocative Truth That Changes Everything We Know About God. Real quickly, what's it about?
Yeah. Well, the book is about this idea of Jesus saying, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." I call that the flip. that Jesus says we all have a story of God that gets wrapped in our heads. Maybe we're told it by our parents or by our church, or maybe we've made it up ourselves and we're telling that story to ourselves. But we end up with this story of God and ourselves and the world that we live in. And Jesus says, I know you've heard that's one way to see the world, but I say to you. And, in Jesus' context, that meant reflecting on the teachings that people had that are often the teachings from Torah. And Jesus said, well, that was just the start. But there's this other way to see it. So don't just love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I say to you, bless those who persecute you and do good to those who wrong you. Live in this new way. It's, when people are being religious about it, they call it repentance, to change your mind, change your way of thinking. So the book means... The call of the book is to say, follow that calling of Jesus if there's another way that you could live, understand your life, and another way to practice. And one of the big flips I talk about in the book is flipping the understanding of God only living in me or in you to all of us living and moving and having our being in God.
Right.
And that's one of the ideas that the Apostle Paul was famous for in one of his most famous sermons, to say that God doesn't live in heaven to be served by human hands. Rather, in God we live and move and have our being.
Wow, very interesting. I want to thank you very much, Doug, for joining us on A Spirited Debate. And make sure to check out his new book, Flip, The Provocative Truth That Changes Everything We Know About God. I'm Lauren Green, and thanks for watching.